So I'm cruising through, organizing all of my receipts for some future projects, documentaries. And one thing I'm noticing is things that I didn't notice before on a lot of these receipts. So this is talking about Wale, refugees. Now notice the word refugees. So this is Tolomato Village, kind of in St. Augustine on the east coast of Florida, okay? Way north. But this is in 1737. They're talking about Wale refugees coming from the north and establishing this place. They were fleeing the attacks on their mission village in South Georgia. Now, what they want you to believe is the only people that were over here at that time in Florida were a bunch of Spanish-looking people or these older Spanish-looking people, such as this, Spanish-looking people or Spaniards, and Indians, these people. They would draw themselves like this, but they never have looked like that. As far as that darker hue color they try to throw in there on the drawings. Because they have to do that in the old drawings because typically old literature in almost all cases describes the people of a dark complexion. But of course we see what they are today. Now that brings me to my point. If the only people here were Spaniards and Indians, and then they said also, they try to toss in every once in a while that these people came in too during that time, but nah, most of the ones that came on a lot of those Spanish expeditions came from North Africa, the part of Africa just right below Spain, because that's a typical area they would go to towards the equator before they headed west. When these folks, in many cases, they didn't bring a whole lot of them. And in many cases, they weren't slaves. That's a whole nother story. But I found this in my receipts. Let me get in a little bit closer. Right here, you see Mission Santa Catalina de Wale. So we're in a Wale area. And what I want you to notice is there's mounds everywhere, right? Mounds. I also want to show you that a lot of books talk about in this same era, Espiritu Santo Bay, which is like somewhere in Florida, where these Indians were living on mounds and had made mounds. The house of the cacique was near the shore on a very high mound formed by hand for defense. Okay, that's one reference. In the invasion of the territory of Alabama from Hernando de Soto, it says, in many towns, the chiefs lived upon high artificial mounds, generally erected in the bottom lands. The top of these mounds contained from 10 to 20 houses occupied by the chiefs. So think about the top having 10 to 20 houses at the top of the mound. That's a large mound. Why does this matter? Well, they said the only two people over here around that time were pretty much Indians and so-called Spaniards. Now, nobody is a paleface. Everybody's a paleface. So why would they be calling them paleface too? Whatever. That's why they do the propaganda with painting them like this. And then they'll say, well, they bred it all out of us. Please. So I want to show you how Wale Indians and other people were some of the people who were here when DeSoto got here, and they were building mounds. And the type of Indians they show you say, hey, and admit, hey, we're not the one that built those mounds. Let me show you.
When confronted with the question of who built these earthen structures, later inhabitants of North America didn't accept that these finds were the work of ancestral Indians. The finds indicated a more sophisticated culture had once thrived there. Not only did the current lifestyle of the Indians seem unrelated, but the Indians themselves, when asked who was responsible for the mounds, didn't have an answer. Anxious for a solution, Americans at the time came up with other explanations.
The earliest interpretations of the people who built the mounds was that they couldn't have been Native Americans. They had to have been constructed by someone coming in from somewhere else, whether they were lost Welsh tribes or lost children of Israel or Maya from South America or something like that. But in fact, they do appear to be, and there's no evidence to suggest that they're not, purely indigenous. The people who were living here at the time constructed them.
The people who were living here at the time constructed them. Well, who were living there at the time? Let's see what another person says about a similar area, because DeSoto went through Florida, then he went through Alabama and other areas. What did DeSoto see?
The Indian groups that the Soda expedition encountered were a well-organized society. They had a ruling class. They built mounds for their leaders. They had an extensive trade network over the entire southeast, probably much over the eastern U.S. They were healthy people. And we've also discovered that after these Spanish expeditions of the 16th century passed through, the result of that, as far as the Indian populations were concerned, was a very dramatic change. We think primarily because of those Spanish expeditions. The changes that occurred involved a breakdown of that ruling class. They stopped building mounds. Their ceremonial centers declined.
Well. So the people who were here still were building mounds. In Florida, there's lots of mounds. In books on Florida, the chiefs are sitting upon mounds, the caciques. I never hear the natives call their chiefs caciques. Never. Either way, they said they didn't build these mounds. So how could they be there when the people who built the mounds was still there? According to this guy who is talking about the DeSoto expedition. He says, hey, when he got here, they were building mounds. And at the same time, he told you they stopped. So it was still going on, not like it was some ancient thing. But then you also got this guy saying that it can't be the Native Americans either. And that it could have been people coming from the lost tribes of Israel, right? He said that. Please don't make me break out all of my references talking about Indians being of these people, having these kind of practices in many cases, okay? The Indians which approach to those of the right. So please don't make me do that, because these people don't have a story of being that either. They don't have a story of being that. They don't have a story of building mounds. They don't call their chiefs caciques. Who are these people? Because again, the only people that was here in the Wale region were Indians and Spaniards. Not no Africans. Not these Indians. These Indians. These Indians. These mound builders who have HEBREW practices. Or we used to speak the languages, the JEW practices. HEBREW is a language. These Indians. Because if you ain't built no mounds, you don't call your people caciques. You wasn't really having stories about being down here in the southeast like that when DeSoto came. And most of the people that y'all claim that are Indians in this area right now look like Spaniards. That's why I show this, because these people have turned into these people and want you to forget that they came over as these people. Quit playing with us.